many of you will probably be familiar with today's guest. Adam is great because he's a super humble athlete who has put a ton of his own resources into the sport of distance skateboarding. You can always expect to hear a genuine conversation when speaking with him because he simply has no hidden agenda. He is truly a man of science. And jazz, which it turns out is also a science of its own. We talk a little bit about this, but mostly about the contributions he's made, especially recently with the new Pantheon Karma wheel. No surprise, you can expect to hear ultra skate reflections, but also much more. Adam has an excellent vision for what the future of distance skateboarding could look like, and some of the things that we can all be doing to get there. As always, I'm your host, Max Frank. Sit back and enjoy the show. Hello and welcome to Skating in Circles. I'm here with Adam Ornelles. Adam, how's it going?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man, we're happy to have you on the show. Where are you right now, so the listeners know where you're stationed at the moment?
Right now, I'm in the skating heaven of Madison, Wisconsin, which I say unironically, even though that sounds ironic. But yeah, actually, when I moved to the Midwest, I had no idea that I'd be able to never drive again and skate everywhere.
So what's that? What's that like? Is there just trails like right outside your house and stuff, or just easy to get around?
So I live between two lakes, and it's like a land bridge. And because of that, they don't really have parking, so people don't drive places. Okay. So there's like 250 miles of bike trails. So I either take that or public transit.
Wait, that's really cool. So the trails must be pretty wide too. Then it's like probably pretty chill just to skate around.
Yeah, it's not like other places where there's like tourists and people walking their dog. They're really just like bike paths people use to get around. And they got little counters to count the bikes. And usually there's like 5,000, 10,000 people using the bike path a day sort of thing.
They count the bikes? How do they do that?
They have like a little LED sign. And it even counts the skateboard somehow. I don't know how that works, but
that's pretty neat. That's pretty neat. I would love something like that. Like, I feel like more areas in the US could emulate that and just put trails everywhere.
I love that the geography of the area just made it so it's like, oh, I guess we have to be bikeable because nobody can park on this land bridge. It's great.
Force them into it. That's cool. So yeah, this is a skateboarding podcast. I got to ask you a question. When was your first time riding a skateboard?
Oh man. I mean, my first time riding a skateboard was the typical Target skateboard experience where you get something that doesn't really roll or turn, maybe when I was like 8 or 9. And then I want to say the first time I really rode something, actually my friend's brother was one of the guys who started Loaded. I mean, his brother's friend was somebody who started Loaded.
Cool.
So we had all the weird stuff. So I remember riding a Vanguard and my friend's Loaded Hammerhead, which is really a throwback board, when I was maybe 10 or 11. And then when I want to say when I was 12 or 13, I bought my penny board, and that eventually turned into a longboard a year later. Then, downhill sort of longboarding. But I was pushing everywhere.
Yeah.
Pushed probably 12 miles on my penny board all the time.
Did you really?
Yeah. In flip-flops.
Those little tiny penny boards.
Yeah.
Wow. I remember I had one in my, I had it in the kitchen when I was in college. We had a tile floor kitchen somehow, acquired this in this shitty apartment. And I just had the penny board there. Well, it was super safe for when you were cooking, of course, but.
Oh yeah, we had wood floors as a kid. And my parents were pretty relaxed, and I totally ripstick and penny board around the living room as a kid.
Really? Yeah.
I guess I was skating a little bit earlier, but then 12 then. But
that's cool. So you were already kind of ripping some distance on the just naturally flip flops, penny board.
Yeah, when I think about it, I might be one of the younger. I mean, it's just a product of me being younger than some of the other guys in LDP, but. Mm-hmm. I think I grew up my whole life skating pretty far on longboards. I know I'd skate 13 miles to cross country practice and then 13 miles back after running for 14 miles.
That's wild.
So it's my coach hated me. It probably wasn't great for my running, but I guess this whole time I've been training myself and I didn't realize it.
It's interesting to talk about that. There's no distance riders who have been, or there are, right? People have been skateboarding their whole life, but riding long distances like that. I would consider like 13 miles a long. I mean, you rode 13 miles back after that, so like it's a sizable distance to ride. Especially if you don't have the gear and you're new and all that. So that's pretty cool. You said you were running, so you're an endurance guy. Like you kind of grew up that way.
Yeah. I think when I was like 12, I was running like 50 miles a week,
What?
maybe 60, 70. When I was 13 and 14, I was already running marathons. And I think that's like a fun fact about me is that I have a 6'2" wingspan,
Really?
size torso as somebody who'd be 6'2", but my legs are just really short. And I think it's because when I was like 12 and 13, I was going to the gym every day and also running like marathons and like 10 miles a day.
You think it stunted your growth?
I think I just stunted my growth. Yeah.
You don't think waving your hands with all the running made them longer? You just kind of like stretched them out.
I could just be like a monkey too. I don't remember. Titus was like, "Dang, dude, that's why you're like a monkey." It's like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. That's actually a really fun fact. 6'2" wingspan, and you got to be like 5'10", right? Tall.
5'8". Yeah.
5'8".
I'm
oh
like,
wow.
My wingspan is incredibly longer than my body.
Yeah, that's a lot longer.
I've always wished I had longer legs, but I work with it.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to stop you, man. You've been doing pretty well. We were just talking before this about this sort of pound for pound theory you have, where if you were to go up against some of these, really athletic guys in the scene, guys like Jeff and Paul, and if you guys both had the same exact resources, same exact setup, you think they would beat you. But your ability to kind of capitalize on technology and like refining little components is sort of how you get your edge, you think?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when I think about it, like just in terms of like pure talent, I'd say I'm definitely lower on the scale than some of the people that have existed in distance skating. But the idea is that, I look at everything and I try to optimize everything, and like things like my form or aerodynamics, especially my form, things like that, I can really like adjust just to be a little bit more efficient. And by focusing on details, I feel like you can make really big gains.
Yeah.
So,
well, I think you talk about talent, right? And I think talent comes in many forms though. So you should give yourself credit for like finding this edge and being like, oh, I'm good at this part, so I'm going to refine and, I can, if you spend enough time and like enough energy thinking about this stuff, thinking about form and really digging into it, I feel like that in itself is a talent, right? That you build. It takes time in itself. It takes effort, which is what those guys have put in to get where they are, right? You know what I mean? Like, yeah, they might have some natural gift to them, but obviously, like mentioned Jeff's been a cross country athlete all his life. I'm pretty sure, like growing up as a younger guy, right? And same with Paul. So like, everyone's worked really hard, right? And you have too, right? So give yourself some credit there.
yeah, thanks. No, yeah. Also, it's just not even like capitalizing on your talents. I think for me, it's like I have the ability to switch between things quickly. So everything I do, I try to focus on the things that make me the most uncomfortable. So it's like improving all my weak spots, so there is no weak spot is kind of my thing.
Right.
So like I'm never on the board and feeling comfortable with what I'm doing. I'm always on like the edge of balance. I always feel like I'm gonna fall, that sort of thing, because I want to like improve that every day when I'm training.
Right.
I'm never settling, never comfortable.
Yeah, it doesn't seem so. I watched one of your videos and you were talking about training and you're like, yeah, so we do a tempo week and then we do another tempo week. And then, it was like I didn't see the rest week coming in at any point. I was like, oh, I guess he just doesn't really like, you just kind of rest when you have to, it seems. And like, I think training is tough. And I would like to hear your thoughts kind of on this. Like, is there ever a point where you're like, I'm going too hard? Like that mentality you said where you're like, oh, I'm always on the edge. I'm always trying to improve. Like, when do you know like, oh, I'm going too far. I need to take a break. Because I assume there is a breaking point, correct? Or
yeah, there are. And I think that's the thing people struggle with the most, actually, is not people can like hurt themselves pretty well. And the thing is recovering to fix that, because it's all about hurting yourself and then fixing that. Your body could become stronger. People really focus on like digging a ditch for themselves and being in pain, but they ride the middle ground where what I do is I ride really hard, and then when I rest, I rest.
Hmm.
Um, a lot of people are like, I'm just going to beat myself up every day. And what that does is if you're going to go as hard as you can for an hour, that's really not like, it's not benefiting you too much,
Hmm.
because then you're just going to be fatigued and you're really going to be performing like 80% to something where you'd be racing. So preferably you'd rather rest and then take 2 or 3 days where you're riding 110% of what you can do every 10 minutes and then rest for a second and then really like beat yourself, go faster than you feel comfortable. But if you're just riding as hard as you can on your commute, that's really like 80% of what you can do because that's as hard as you can for 20 minutes, period. But then
Hmm.
when you're racing, you need to go faster than your commute. So people just like to beat themselves up every day, but you could probably work less if you just recover and then work harder when you need to.
Hmm. So some sort of like interval training, and like I think that's just it, right? Dialing it in to the point where you've planned it all out. So when you're out on a ride, you don't go too hard accidentally just because you're fired up or you got excited or something. You're trying to catch a cyclist or something like that, right? Like,
Yeah. Like you pick your battles, you choose an easy day and you stay easy.
yeah,
Or you pick a hard day and it's way too hard. You can't just be like, I'm just gonna wing it and go pretty hard all day. Cause that makes you faster, of course, but maybe it doesn't get you to that top 1% if you're really trying to race.
so like heart rate zones, that plays a big role in your training, though, you would say, so, like every time you go out.
Sort of. They're a great like reference for people just because it's like you understand how much you can do for a certain amount of time, but after a while you can use perceived exertion. Like a lot of professional athletes can use perceived exertion after having other things as like kind of like a reference point. So for me, I'm kind of going off of perceived exertion now, but because heart rate can lie to you, because
Yeah.
caffeine, hydration, temperature, which is a big thing at ultra skate. But
Temperature, yeah, big
yeah,
one. I call that the Eric Danger method, the perceived exertion. I remember asking him once, like, "Oh, do you have a heart rate monitor?" He's like, "No, I don't really need one anymore." Like, he's just dialed
yeah,
in.
it's that classic thing, and I probably use this one too much because I used to play jazz and saxophone in college and stuff. It's this saying that I used to not understand as a kid, but now I think of it all the time as an adult. Is like in jazz, you need to know all the rules before you break the rules, and it's like you're like, why do I need to do? Why can't I just improvise first? But in reality, is like if you don't understand your limits and exactly what you need to be doing, improvising, you're just going to be all over the place. There'll be
Yeah.
no like coherency, and you're going to really screw up. So somebody like Eric is wise and knows his body really well, but maybe somebody who's getting into it would benefit from using something like a heart rate. They get a better understanding of what they're doing.
Yeah, or back into it, right? If you've been off the game for a while, it's good to sort of see where you're at when you come back and know how hard you can push yourself, right? Like
Oh
if you're
yeah,
coming back from
definitely.
injury or
Yeah.
something.
Sometimes I use heart rate just because it's like I feel like, you got to reacquaint yourself and realize that you can push yourself harder once in a while. And heart rate numbers can kind of force you to come to the reality that you need to work harder.
Hmm. It is fun too to like look at the numbers, especially looking back at them.
Oh yeah, people love looking at numbers. Me too. Yeah.
You'll be like 160, or you'll be like whatever, like 160. Like, oh, that's pretty tough. I don't know if I can do that for 8 hours or whatever. But you only know your limits by like seeing it in some form. I guess like you need some tangible way to kind of gauge it at first, I guess.
Yeah, and then once you get to the point where you really understand your body and ultra skate comes, then you can ignore it a little bit, but use it as a guide. Ultra skate, I was like, okay, I got to stay in my heart rate zones, and I was keeping it low. Second year, I was like, I gotta go faster if I at least want to try. And that was a really hot year, and I got screwed up by the heat. But I realized it could run way higher than I thought. And the third year, I averaged 155 beats per minute, which is literature wise impossible.
Averaging
But
it exactly, yeah.
yeah, my average was 155. I was hitting like 170, which is really high.
Yeah.
People don't know. You shouldn't be able to hold that for more than an hour. And that's a good example of you got to be able to know your body well. And then you could ignore the heart rate sometimes. But that's like a good reference point. It's like, geez.
Ultra skate is a different beast, right? Because you'll be out there and you're trying to hang, like you're saying, you're trying to keep your heart rate low, you're trying to keep it chill, but everything's just so out of your control. Like even just being excited. I remember like doing the first lap one year. I was just really pumped and I wasn't even going that fast. I looked down and I'm at like 170, dude. I'm just like, what's going on? Like not even working that hard.
Yeah, and the tension is killing you because people are looking at you like, "Hey, are you gonna go faster?" And I'm like, I'm doing my own thing, guys. I don't know what you're doing."
I am curious. So you said you've gone to three ultra skate Miami?
Yeah. First one was the one Joe set the record at, and that one was like, I didn't really know what I was doing, but the temperature was great. Piece of cake. Went 291 first ultra.
Nice. Yeah, that's
Second
the
one,
record.
it was like hot as crap.
That was 2022.
Yeah, and that one, like, I think Andy like had like heat stroke or something, and it was just like everyone was having heat stroke. Paul was having heat stroke, and I was like just out there trying to survive and not throw up.
Yeah.
And then third year, it was just as hot, but I was kind of more ready for it.
Yeah, you
and then
looked
I
good.
got over 300.
Yeah, that was fun to see. I remember. So I was just talking to Gavin, and we were talking about 2022 and how intense of a year it was, and like you mentioned how hot it was for all day, and then finally the sun comes down and it starts raining. Like,
Yeah, that was awful actually because
Yeah.
it was humid, and then you don't cool down at all.
yeah, it just like steam coming right off the pavement.
Yeah, I don't know. There's not a lot of good references for how awful Miami is, but I guess like when you look at like Matthew Bond's distances, I know
Oh
like
god, yeah.
one year he did like Le Mans, he did like at Le Mans, he did like 280, 290. And then this year at Ultra, he did like 240, I think.
Damn.
It just cause like the temperature is just so ridiculous. Like temperature is the worst thing that could happen to you in an endurance sport. I think the numbers are like every certain degrees, you can kind of calculate how much energy you lose, like peak fitness wise, every degree your body temperature goes up, and it can be like 10 to 15%.
Wow.
So you could be 10 to 15% slower just because of the temperature.
Or wind, right?
Oh yeah, the wind both years is like 15, 20 miles per hour. But it kind of comes back on the tail end. I mean, you don't get everything back.
But. Right. Yeah. And that's a fun concept to like think about. I remember 2020 was windy. It was like really nice for 3 hours. And then all hell broke loose. It started raining. The wind picked up. And the rain eventually like died down at hour 12. But the wind was still going strong until like, early in the next morning. So every backstretch you went on, it was just like full face wind, just like blocking you. And it was so bad, dude. Like I remember some people could barely skate, like especially after 16 hours or whatever. And like you don't get it back on the backstretch when it's that bad, right? Because like number one, this is the stretch where you're at the pit stop, yeah. So you're like trying to slow down, but it's also just like over quicker, so like then you have to work hard again, and like I don't know, the wind is a really funny factor, especially with like an out and back or a loop track. It never seems fair.
The number one thing with wind is you just can't fight it. I mean, if it's like 30 miles per hour winds, then you stop, so you do have to fight it. But like the reality is like you just have to take it as what it is, because if you work harder against it, it's gonna catch up with you, and then you're done.
Yeah, like you can't keep up your pace, whatever pace you're trying when it's that strong.
I can get aerodynamic and get a couple extra miles per hour when it's really windy on the backstretch.
That's true. Yeah.
You can also like get up against the barriers, and then you get some nice wind effects where it's not quite as bad, but sometimes the wind goes against it and makes it worse. So you have to.
It's also where everyone pees. Right next to the barrier.
That's a secret though.
Yeah. Top secret. Nobody knows. Yeah. You mentioned Matthew Bond, and I think Matthew Bond is a really good textbook example. There are other people like this, but he's a great example of someone who's been to like every ultra skate. So he knows, like he's been to Dutch, he's been to Miami, and I don't know if he's been to the UK one, but like he's seen a lot of the different sort of what the weather can do at an ultra skate. And Le Mans, you said that was the third one.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
like,
yeah, that's awesome that he's done that.
yeah, and he's always putting up numbers. It's like usually above 200. It's which is so hard to do. Again, talking with Gavin about this, you can do as many ultras as you want, and like you'll know more. Your experience is going to help you, but the task itself of like skating 200, skating 100 miles, whatever, it never gets easier.
Yeah, that's it's always like I'm never gonna do it again situation once you really like die. I mean, last year actually I felt perfectly like fine. I didn't even have a single moment where it's like I want to quit. But
Really,
yeah, second year I was like I had a ripping headache the whole time when I did 280 in the heat. I had a ripping headache and wanted to throw up for like 14 hours.
oh wow, yeah, that's brutal. And that's just it, right? The ultra skate like compounds all your discomfort. So if you're out on a ride, like a normal ride, and you're like, oh, I feel kind of sick, it's like, oh, okay, I'll get home and I'll take a nap or some shit, right? At ultra skate, it's like, oh, I feel kind of sick, I'm gonna feel like this for the next 10 hours. Like,
Yeah,
oh,
like
no.
dumb little things make a big difference. I realized I've been using compression socks the last 3 years. In the middle of year 3, I was like, oh, my compression socks actually, like my legs swell up to the, well, they don't swell up, but like my compression socks cut off the blood in my arteries.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why my hamstrings hurt. I always thought I had like a hamstring tweak that happened around like 12 hours into a ride. But actually, it was just the compression socks cutting off blood to my leg.
That's really
And
interesting.
then when I took them off, I got like an extra mile per hour
Really?
in the second half of the third ultra. So I was like, well, crap, that's like a really stupid reason to be in pain for 2 years. I just didn't even consider that it's like a thing.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Even shoes, I think, is a good idea. I was wearing the Five Fingers for a while. I really liked them. They're great shoes. I stopped wearing them for like a Merrill Trail Glove, which is like more of a sock. There's there's no fingers, and that helps with like whenever my feet swell. You know?
It's funny because that's another thing with ultra and all these other things is I always have been a minimalist shoe guy. Like even before minimalist shoes were a thing. Like I was like what 12, 11. When I was 11, I was running minimalist. So that's before they even had like lems and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Or so I was actually running in like Huarache sandals and stuff in 2010, 2011,
Really?
I guess. Even earlier, like 2007. Yeah. Or running flats before they had those. So like that's been a good translation because you have to adjust to minimalist shoes like those vapor gloves. You can't just go straight to it sometimes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've always been minimalist. And I think that's part of the reason why I don't get injured.
The minimalist shoes are. It's a really good point you made. Like my partner's just learning to skate, and she was using the minimalist shoes, and like they weren't doing it for her.
Yeah, it's a big thing because like your feet change, your body changes, and you can't just adapt to it instantly.
Yeah, and if you use like skate shoes or something like that, you might have a better time just because your foot needs to grow into the like ability to ride the board, right? You know what I mean? Like all those little tiny muscles you just wouldn't use otherwise.
It's amazing. Like when I take Hannah, my significant other, skating, it's like she's like, man, my arches are screwed, and it's been like 30 minutes, and I'm like, man, that doesn't happen to me anymore. But I guess that's true. That used to happen.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And that's one of those tips that newer people would love, I think would really benefit to hear, right? When they're out on their first long ride and they're like, ooh, my feet really hurt. Is this a sign? Like, is this really bad? Like, am I hurting myself or is this normal? Right.
Yeah. Part of it's switching feet also that like lets them rest. And I think the blood pulls up in your foot and stuff. Cause Mitch Pasquale, the guy who did 285, I think he did 285 with one foot. His one foot really swole up and hurt the whole time. So
yeah, I could see that happening. And like the 24 hours just compounds all these things. You have one little small ailment, it's going to turn into a big one. 1 year, this happens to my brother and I, our big toe, one of our big toes, not both of them usually, will get like just black, like the nail, there's like gets bruised underneath, right? And the blood, there's like dried blood or some shit, right? And the nail just has to die off. It takes about a year for it to like go back to normal. So you're at the next ultra skate. You're like, hope it doesn't happen again because I just got a new nail.
Yeah, the funny thing about being like at a higher level is it's weird because like yeah, you get all those injuries when you're going 24 hours. But then for me, I don't know what happened, but like I'm like ready to skate like 3 days after ultra now.
Uh-huh.
I don't know what's it's like. I got no blisters. I got no pains. People always message me and they're like, "Dude, are cyclists," and they're like, "That's unhealthy." And I'm like, "Look, man, I used to do biking, and that was way worse."
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you know, unhealthy, right? Like who's to say, right? Like they're talking about the actual 24 hours unhealthy, or the fact that you're
Yeah, the
so
24
fast?
hours. But I'm
Yeah.
like, I mean, to be fair, I think that is. I bet ultra's taken a year off my life at this point.
I don't know. Like, who's to say? You know,
I mean,
like,
compared to heart disease, maybe not actually, but
and you know, like, yeah, like what? I don't know, man. Like, not to get too dark, but like, you could die any day. You know what I mean? Like, who's to say what's gonna kill you, right? Like, take a year off your life. It could have also given you a year if you were doing something else, right? Like, we got to do something with our time, and everything's gonna slightly deteriorate your body in some way. Maybe not though. Maybe we're invincible.
yeah. And as bad as we make it sound, I think like you need the social interaction too. Like seeing all these people is kind of what gives you the energy to keep on training and keep on staying healthy.
Yeah. Yeah, guys. The only way to make friends is to ride 24 hours on a skateboard. I don't know if you
It's
know
a
this.
great place to make friends because it's one of
It is
the
100%.
only race you can talk and chat and potentially stop if you want to.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the best thing about ultra is it's like a party where people are riding their skateboards around in a circle, you know, like that's it.
Yeah, I'd like to take it chill 1 year eventually.
We say that,
But
and then it's like I could just sign up for solo, right? Like, I mean, you've done some pretty impressive shit, right? So I wouldn't knock you for taking a year off. But whenever I think about it, I'm like, well, I still want to push a certain mileage, right? Like, I'm not done doing solo, so it's like you only get one Miami ultra skate a year. You get multiple ultra skates a year if you can, right? You only get so many opportunities, so it's hard to just turn it down completely.
yeah, people are always like, "Hey, man, you could totally just like stay at my place if you fly to the Netherlands." And I'm like, "Dude, I can't. Like, I can't.
Yeah.
I don't have the money. I don't have the vacation. I don't care if like I can do everything else for free. It's just like flying to Miami is cheap and it's really easy to justify because it's in the middle of the winter."
Yeah. Yeah. I would love to go to Dutch. I haven't been. I think I'm going to try and go 2024, but we'll see.
I got to
We will
save
see.
up and then find the vacation, but I would love to go there. Yeah.
Make like a Euro trip out of it. Do a bunch of things.
Yeah. Go to Europe, see what it's like. I would love that. It just seems like a lot safer place to be a skater.
Yeah, and we talked about how you have trails where you live, but that's pretty uncommon in the U.S.
Yeah.
In Europe, not
And I
so
still
much.
love skating in traffic because like we have that whole downtown area. So, and like, you know, the cars are slower because it's a busy downtown.
Skating
and
in
it's like-
traffic.
Skating with traffic is just like, you know, I'm on my commute. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna take the downtown route because that's the fastest way anyway. And I love skating around traffic. It's just like, it's not something I could advise for people to do, but it's just so fun. It's like a vice.
So let me ask you: you did Broadway Bomb. After doing that, did that instill more confidence in you to skate around cars?
You know, I was already ready for it. Like,
You were ready for it.
you know, like as someone who's like used to downhilling around cars in Asheville when I'd like commute downtown, you know, like you go like 30 miles per hour and you're commuting without any gloves downtown Asheville. Because like I got to ride down the mountain and into town and then around downtown with the traffic. It's just like, I don't know, New York isn't really that bad traffic wise. The traffic's slow.
No, that's a great point. Like, it looks super scary. Like, you have a great video on Broadway Bomb, so people should check that out. And the footage is scary to watch sometimes. It's like, ooh, he's gonna hit the car, you know, like. But part of it is the camera, and
Yeah, exactly.
part of it is like when you're like standing, right? You're only like an inch off the ground, and you're moving just as fast as the cars. It's a lot more predictable. You can be like, if like worst case right now in this very moment, I jump on this car, you know what I mean? And the car's
exactly.
probably gonna
Like,
stop. Like, then we're okay.
The worst thing that could really happen is a car hit you, but I think the worst thing that realistically will happen if you're comfortable on a board and you're not the type of person who falls down. I don't want to say I don't fall down, but I don't fall down really. Is that like you can run it off because in New York, you're not really ever going that fast.
No, it's valid.
Even if you're going like 17, 18 miles per hour, you know, like by the time you see a car, slow down a little bit and then you're good to go. Your board might get destroyed, but New York isn't that dangerous. It's just like you could get like a minor injury, and that would be something that screw up my training. So I'm trying to figure out if I really want to race Broadway Bomb this year or wait a little bit since I'm going all in on Ultra Skate this year.
Oh, okay. I was going to ask you about Broadway Bomb. I might try and go down. It's not too hard for me to get there, and the city is really fun to go to. So 17, 18 miles an hour, like you were saying, I think that's pretty fast, right? And like this whole idea you proposed of like falling while you're in traffic is super scary. But the cool thing about that I've noticed, and maybe you've noticed this too, is like when you're riding around New York, the cars notice you a lot more than like other places, right? And they're less likely to try and cut you off because they know what you're doing. They're like, this person, some crazy dude on a skateboard. I've seen hundreds of them today. You know what I mean? Like very common thing. And you're almost given the right of way. It's kind of nice.
Yeah, I mean, with the advent of like bike delivery and all these other things, it's become better and better too.
Yeah.
It's just like people know if they're driving, especially in Manhattan, that like they probably shouldn't be driving there and they're like scared or lost or they're experienced there. So it's the only place in the United States I'd actually be really comfortable riding in traffic with no worries.
That's a really good point about the whole bike delivery and everything. I wonder if some of these cities, these big like American cities that are known for just having the worst traffic, like you say, why are you driving in New York City? Like just don't do it. Anyone who's thinking about doing it, don't do it. Like at that point, maybe we just should shut down the streets. You know what I mean? Like maybe they just shouldn't exist. Like,
which is what they did where I live. Actually, we have like completely close to that are only bikes and pedestrians through the downtown.
That's
and
perfect.
That's actually one of the roads I ride a lot. And it's like, it's great. And I think part of that's like all the infrastructure thing with America. And I don't know if the Europeans quite get how bad trying to ride in the United States is. But since we had time to develop our cities in a way that cars were always around, only like a couple cities that were designed before cars are really rideable. Everything else is streamlined so cars can go 45 in the middle of a downtown area. Yeah. Like Chicago, because Chicago burned down. And then they rebuilt it for cars. Exactly. But New York is like here to stay. And Washington, D.C. is like, no, they got cars, but
I mean, they're a little bit better. Like all these cities have been built over like on top of their old selves, right? I wonder if they're just going to do it again and be like, yeah, scrap this one. We're going to make this
it's got to burn down now.
Oh, no.
No, yeah. So where are we?
We were talking about Ultra Skate. So we were talking about Ultra Skate. One of the things we see often at Ultra Skate, right, are big wheels. Now you have a philosophy about big wheels that maybe you'd like to share. Sort of like we could talk sort of like what is the ideal wheel size, right? And like how big is too big? To get up to speed is going to take effort, right?
Yeah, I like to think of it like big wheels, wheel size is a lot like your gears on your bike.
Okay.
Like smaller wheels get up to speed faster, like a smaller chainring on a bike, but then like track cyclists have a gigantic chainring, which means your gear ratio is higher. And big wheels are kind of similar. They're heavier, they're harder to get up to speed, but they hold momentum and they roll over things better. Just like that's a fact. They roll over things better.
Yeah.
But there's other aspects that makes them worse. But in general, I do like wheel choice in that sort of manner. And for me, I think me and Titus and Kiefer Dixon, those types of people, we have like short, powerful legs. So pushing a huge wheel is really no issue for us. Acceleration, it does feel a little bit harder.
Interesting.
But like, I don't mind it. And 90% of the time you're at your full speed or trying to get there. So it's like, people are like, I can't accelerate that big wheel. But for me, it's like, I'm accelerating to a top speed. And it's all about holding that top speed when I'm in a race.
Yeah.
Unless I'm stopping every 3 seconds. For me, a big wheel just makes more sense if I'm straight line speeding it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think That's super cool, right? Like this whole idea of small wheel accelerates faster, big wheel accelerates slower. Like that makes sense. And then you mentioned the big wheels rollover stuff easier, which again, really simple concept, easy to understand. But like for a skateboard, at what point is the wheel at that sweet spot, right? Like it's hard to know where it's like, oh, this is going to roll over most things and it's going to hold 12.5 miles an hour really nicely or something like that. I need a bigger wheel to hold 13.5. I'd be curious to know, like, have you done any sort of personal research in that area of what is the optimal wheel for a certain speed?
That's like kind of a mystery to me in a way that I've researched it a lot and I've done testing with stuff. And I'm trying to set up a rig with a treadmill and a force sensor and a sledge, the old wheels and test them, which I'm working on. And then I'm going to put like different grit sandpaper on it.
Nice.
To get a representative idea, at least. Maybe it's not perfectly representative, but yeah, it's impossible to tell what the best size wheel is when you have to account for other things like weight and grip, which are all important. And also, like, I guess something to mention is not only is it hard to get a heavier wheel to speed, but it changes the way your form works. Because, like, for me, I'm not just pushing with one foot, I'm lunging with the other. I have kind of like a one in the give and take. I push one foot forward, and then I push the pushing ground foot backwards, and then I get a little bit more momentum out of it. And when you have a heavier wheel, it impacts the speed you can do that at because it doesn't want to accelerate under you as easily. So like it's possible that big wheels actually do take more out of you than you think, even in like a distance thing, depending on your pushing form. It's all very like style dependent.
So you're saying like every push you take, you're essentially trying to accelerate the wheel faster. So if it's bigger, that's going to be harder to do. So technically, every push you take might be taking more out of you than it's worth.
Yeah, not only getting up to speed, but the acceleration, like from a literal sense, you have like a 1 second acceleration where you're just lunging the board a little bit. That could be impacting you. It's kind of hard to measure that sort of thing. And it depends on your form.
Right.
Too.
This is a tricky thing about skateboards. You know, with a bike, you're just pedaling. It's a mechanism that you're working. So it's like, okay, the mechanism is what drives the power. Or you're driving the mechanism is what dictates sort of like the power. Whereas with the skateboard, it's like, it's you pushing down on the ground. And then as you mentioned, you have this board foot that also pushes the board forward, you know, like, and that's one hit. And then you have to bring it back. And then you have another hit. Whereas with the bike, it's like repetitive motion. It's like boom, 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 you know, even with running, a little more rhythmic where it's like, one then the other, one then the other. With a skateboard, it's so tricky because your cadence of push is going to change based on, you know, the incline, based on the terrain and all this. It's just hard to know exactly how much effort you're putting out. Like, is there a way to get like a power meter on a skateboard? I wonder. That would be so cool.
There is. I just haven't bothered setting it up, but there is.
How would you do that?
They have these things called the power dot and other things I've used in cycling, and then you can use them to calculate your aerodynamic drag and stuff. But the power dot can also calculate real-time power through like estimating things. Essentially what it does is it measures your wind resistance, the incline you're at, the vibration in the road, the calculated rolling resistance, the wind resistance, and everything else. And that can be used, and your speed, and that can be used to calculate the exact power you're inputting at that second. And it works like every millisecond. And I have one of those for a bike, and I talked to the company, and you could set it up on a longboard theoretically, but it's just like, I don't really need that in my life because it's like, I don't need to be looking at those numbers per se. I mean, maybe it'd be cool, but I just don't feel like it's worth my effort.
That sounds fun. I think knowing the power would be kind of cool.
It's still like not perfect.
Yeah, as far as what you do with that information, even like I don't really know. It's just kind of fun. Another fun.
Yeah, I don't want to like go through the time of setting that up and then have it like, oh, actually the vibration's too high and it doesn't work.
yeah, and that's just it, right? Like you understand the investment there is not just try the thing and see if it works. It's more like, when it doesn't work, what do I do with all the time I just spent?
Yeah, like I love messing with setups, but also like sometimes they take up way too much of my time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like, because I mess with setups every day, I feel like, and then it just screws my time over. Yeah. So like the big wheels, I think have been a really cool progression, but it's still like a little, like it's hard for me to recommend it for everyone.
So you were riding the InGens, the Hyperdrive 100 millimeter. You still using? Well, there's another wheel in town we can talk about, but you still like those for like a big wheel to recommend?
So another thing is like testing wheels. You can't really trust the durometer of most wheels, it turns out.
Sure.
So these hyperdrives are 100 millimeters. They say 74A, but really they're like 71.5A when you measure them. And I do really like them, but that's also because most of the riding I do is on like bad pavement. Like I have those bike paths, which are really nice.
Mm-hmm.
But then most of my commuting going through downtown and stuff is like the worst potholes you've ever seen. Like I have potholes that could swallow 100 millimeter wheels. And if I just hit them fast enough, it's not an issue.
Nice.
So like going through cracks every 3 seconds, it's like the softer wheel is exponentially more important than having a rolling speed wheel. So like, I don't know if the hyperdrive engine's for everyone, but it is a really soft wheel that does well at things like Latiga, where there's a lot of like ugly concrete.
Yeah, consistently ugly. Or I like what you said about the sidewalk. Sidewalks are awesome for bikes, but for skateboards, it's like, oh no. You know, I was just out in Colorado and I feel like a lot of their trails are those big sidewalk chunks, which again, as a bike, you don't really care, but any little fluctuation between them on a skateboard, you're going to feel.
Yeah. So like with a 71A, 100 millimeter wheel, you like barely feel it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
which
fair.
is a huge difference because then you can balance and then you can push easier. And that's more important at the end of the day than like 2% gains.
Right. Which would be like, say, a harder wheel might run faster, but
every impact is going to put you off balance. And that's part of the reason I run softer wheels at Ultra Skate, even though Ultra Skate is 50% nice and 50% bad pavement wise. It's just like when it's the bad part, I just get really pissed off at hour 20 that I'm getting pushed off balance by the bad pavement.
Do you know anything about like when a wheel has been spinning for that long, if it behaves differently, like if it heats up or takes on a certain form, because it's like such a soft material?
It shouldn't be, it shouldn't be an issue because like we're relatively low speed still, especially like in Ultra Skate. Maybe like if you're going downhill at 80, it definitely makes a difference. But
the time isn't a factor there. It's just speed would be more of a factor.
Yeah. Maybe temperature would make a slight difference because, you know, the pavement more than the rolling.
Yeah.
But if you're pumping really hard, it puts some heat into the wheels.
Interesting. What about like bearings? Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I've done some math about bearings, not because I'm researching them, but because I was just curious how many revolutions, how fast they're going, and bearings are fine. Bearings are really like over-engineered for skating in terms of rotating, maybe not in side loads, but they're great.
Do you think, like, as far as cleaning bearings goes, there's a certain point where they do get gummed up, right? Would you recommend cleaning them, or would you just...
For me, it's just like, when you clean them out, you don't get everything out, and sometimes the races are still worn out. And for me, if you're sliding and stuff, really you wear out the races, and then your bearings rattle because they don't fit as well. The tolerances go away. And that's just like an inevitable thing with all bearings.
Yeah. Eventually
they start rattling, and then I'm like, well, I'm not going to bother to clean this out. It'll just be a rain set. And then I buy a new set.
Yeah. So sliding kind of like creates some sort of torque on the wheel, right? Because it's shredding the wheel. So I imagine it does something to the bearing.
It's surprisingly a lot of force. But yeah, like it's like with radial bearings that we use, they're really not meant for side loads like sliding. Gotcha. So the reality is they just wear out. Eventually they wear out. The races wear out, maybe not the balls as much. And then you have a looser bearing, which rattles, and it's like, well, whatever.
I remember for a while, everyone was just like constantly cleaning them. And I still like to, because out here we get a lot of salt in the roads. So, so if I'm like, you know, so if I'm like training in the winter when they're really good at plowing and like getting the roads dry, so I can skate when there's snow on the ground, but there's salt on the road. So then, you know, cleaning out the bearings is kind of helpful.
I have like my winter setup, and I just have like a sink in the basement, and I just come into the basement, spray that shit with WD-40 and call it. I just spin the wheel and spray it a little bit WD-40 to get the water out of it, and then at least that way it doesn't completely seize up. But when I ride to work, if it's snowy and icy, by the time it's time to go home, the bearings are so seized that I can barely move them. And then sometimes I'm like, uh-oh. But maybe I need to be like Hank Hill from Hank Hill, and have some WD-40 on my belt. Yeah. King of the Hill.
I do, you ever hear of citrus degreaser? You know what that is?
Yeah, I have some of that.
I use that on bearings. I just swill them around. Will, my brother, made these really cool. Like it's a bottle. It's a glass bottle with a giant bolt that runs through the whole thing. So you slide the bearings onto that bolt. The bolt is connected to the cap of the bottle. It's like an old kombucha
Oh
bottle.
yeah,
You just screw it
kind
on.
of like those like name brand ones from Bones.
I think so. I think he might have emulated something, maybe. So I have one of those, and I just kind of swill it around and dry them off and put them back on. Usually cleans out a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, for me, it's like getting the races off is the worst part because I don't want to bend the races because then it screws up the bearing, and that's like the best way to get the gunk out of it. And I'm like, well, whatever. I'm just gonna flush it out with WD-40 and call it a day because it's not my race setup.
Yeah, that's just it, right? Once you pop those shields off, you call them races? Is that what they're called? Like
No. Yeah, the bearing shields. That's probably just misthinking. Yeah, once you pop the bearing shields off, if you just like bend them a little bit, then they're screwed. So
yeah, even if you like trying to get them back on, it's unlikely you won't bend them. Like so they usually kind of don't go on right.
Or you make a little hole in the seal that doesn't that lets stuff in more, and it's just
I've like tried to match them up, be like, oh, this shield belongs to this bearing, and then I go back and try and put them back, and it still doesn't work.
Yeah.
I remember as a kid growing up when watching like how to set up your skateboard videos. I think it was Bam Margera doing like a how to set up your skateboard video. He was like, and then you want to make sure you pop the shields off because we don't want those or whatever. It was just some edgy thing to do. It's like, oh, that's a nice way to just gum up your bearings. Like just take the shields right off.
It's like it's like it lets dirt in, but also lets dirt out if you're never going to maintain them.
Yeah.
So I guess that's the street skater mindset, especially since they're riding over all sorts of crap in parks. There's so much dust.
Right. And he was even saying, he's like, it helps them run faster, which he might have been right because as we just said, the shield sometimes screws up the bearing. So like, who knows? Maybe he was onto something.
Yeah, I want some of those Bronson shieldless bearings. They're so cool looking.
I have not seen those. That sounds nice.
Yeah, they have them. They're like, no shields. These are the coolest bearings ever. The cages are holding the balls in are like orange. It looks super cool.
That's neat. I love orange. Orange is good. Very, very common longboarding color, obviously.
Yeah, man.
We're talking about wheels. Let's talk about this new exciting stuff coming out. It's already been posted on Instagram at this point, so we can talk about it. The new Pantheon wheel. It's called the Karma 92 millimeter. What's the durometer? I don't know off the top of my head.
74A.
74A.
Oh, a real 74A.
And you worked with Jeff on this?
Yeah, Jeff was looking to make a wheel, right? Because he had wheels in the past and that fell through. There were some disagreements. And, the obvious thing as a manufacturer, everyone needs it, is sell your own wheels because then you don't have to be the middleman. Then you can survive as a company. And I don't know how, Jeff is a boutique longboard guy, right? He makes the best longboards. He doesn't sell a lot of them. So the guy's not making a huge amount of money. He's doing it because he loves it, and he needs some wheels. But then Jeff was talking to me, and I was like, "Hey, man, so why don't we make good wheels though? Not like those Zenit 100 millimeters where they're just another relabeled Mids AliExpress flywheel copy."
Sure, yeah.
Because people like Titus, he breaks cores of wheels, of cheap wheels. So Titus would break something like that. And, when you get to a higher level, you want grip. And that's the big issue with big wheels is I'm always in search of a big wheel that doesn't have crappy grip. And it's not just grip. You can have grip, but then you can have grip release where the wheel releases the grip predictably. And if you want to get on the edge of your pump or go downhill predictable, you don't want to just all of a sudden lose traction.
Sure.
Just something I found with those 100 millimeter flywheel copies or those 85 millimeter or 90 millimeter Hurricanes, all those random sort of things. So I was like, Jeff, we could just design a new wheel. And he's like, yeah, I mean, the manufacturer is down for it. So it was like, all right, I'm not going to let you make a bad wheel. We got to really think about this. So that was kind of how it started. And then I was like, all right, Jeff, here's my pitch. And I sent Jeff 100 slide PowerPoint.
Wow.
And everything I could find on literature on urethane roller and urethane wheel design.
I would
And
like
I
to
was
see
like, look,
that.
man, we can make something that isn't like just another ordinary stock wheel, because that's like the thing with bikes and everything. When you get it complete, usually on a bicycle, on a longboard, the wheels are kind of the afterthought.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so that's where that started. And then we kind of delved into like basically optimizing this wheel with the idea that it needs to fit a Pantheon setup. Like, I think we want to make other wheels in the future, but the first thing we needed to do, obviously, is make a wheel that fits all the Pantheon setups. And then there is where we worked from the design of the wheel that works as well as possible, given all the things we wanted. But it has to have these certain like clearance on the inside edge, stuff like that. And we wanted to be as big as possible to still have clearance to fit stuff like the trip and all these drop through boards.
That's so cool. I love how his setups are so dialed in like that. Like this will fit these trucks on these wheels. And you can't prepare for every single setup someone's going to do, right? Like there's so many different variations, right? If someone wants to throw like a really fat contact patch wheel on your set, whatever, like you just can't really prepare for that. You're going to have to let them figure it out and like let them figure out how it's not going to get wheel bite or whatever. But I love how he's like taking conventional, like, easy to get parts, right? Like the Bear trucks and stuff like that, and making them compatible with his stuff.
Yeah, the way I always put it is like people are like, God dang, that's a lot of money for a longboard. But I'm like, in every sport, in every hobby, there's like something to aspire to. Like we love gear, people love things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's like, usually you have to aspire to like, dang, I would love to own a Ferrari, or I would love to own that's $14,000 S-Works bicycle,
Right.
or I'd love to own those $350 Nike marathon running shoes. So like when you look at something like a Pantheon Complete, you're like, okay, this is the hobby, this is the thing I care about, and I could have the best thing, and it's within reach.
Mm-hmm.
And it will last a lot longer than something ridiculous like Nike Vaporfly marathon shoes.
Yeah. The board does last a really long time, especially if you take care of it.
Yeah. So like Jeff's outlook, you're like, oh, I could buy a completely stock board now that the best people are racing.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can pump on it too.
Yeah, that's the goal.
Like being able to pump a set, like a stock setup, that's pretty cool. Like that wasn't always a thing. Like I feel like even dialing in a setup, right? Especially a pump setup is like something you have to learn how to do, for one.
Yeah. Like Jeff gives you a great head start.
Exactly.
Some of the stuff is esoteric, but like, I don't know, like when I started riding, I wanted lower degree rears because I was doing a lot of downhill, and I needed some more stiffness and durability in my boards because they're riding in the rain. And originally Pantheon was all wood, and I had the mod everything. I'd like carbon fiber and foam core my decks and stuff, and do all this stuff to my Pantheons.
Uh-huh.
But now like they're fiberglass, they're made with waterproof epoxy, so like it's inherently waterproof without needing any sort of like protection. It's like soaked in waterproof material.
Yeah.
So like now the Pantheons are more expensive per se, but like I literally been riding a stock 7-ply, and I'm like, I could race this for everything. And then maybe a 6-ply with bigger wheels stock for ultra skate.
And you like the Supersonic pretty good?
Yeah, I like it a lot. Maybe if I was doing more downhill, I'd stay with the Trip again, just because I have like it's a little stiffer, better concave. But I just love the Supersonic because you can run narrow trucks, and risers means you can adjust it really easily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the top mount is pretty cool, and just having those options built into the setup, like it's already angled for you. You don't have to wedge it if you don't want to, kind of thing. It's pretty cool. When you ride the Trip, you just ride the drop through setup, not like chopped or anything.
2 Trip setups. Like I was in Calgary with Paul, and I was riding with him for a little while, and it was just like a typical 50-50 Trip. The rear end's kind of lively, which can be sketchy at higher speeds. And then I also have a 0.55 Trip, and that's kind of like my downhill guy, or maybe I'll do like 50 or 30 or something, and I have a Randall base plate. But like, yeah, so I'll set up something like that with the drop through.
So on that, you're just going straight downhill. You're not doing any switch, right? The 55-0.
Yeah. So like, I mean, people will be like, yeah, you should do switch. But like, the reality is if I'm riding in the mountains every day back when I lived in Asheville, like I don't want to fall. So I'm doing gloves down if I want to slide. So it's
Right.
like if I'm gloves down, then I don't need to go switch because like sometimes if you do stand up slide, well, first of all, you never know. Like stand up slide, there's always that 3% chance you're just going to eat crap, which is a bad chance every day. But like,
Yeah.
if I have gloves down, then I can always do some sort of pendulum slide where it's like come back facing the same direction. So then I
Yeah.
have those directional setups anyway, and they're more stable.
Did you do any like sliding when you were at La Liga this past year? Did you have to do any of that on any of the crazy little downhill sections?
I'm like, would never consider it. Paul could do it because Paul's like, he's a legit downhill racer. I can do downhill. I did it every day, but it's not something like where I'm not at the Paul level where I'm risking my limbs.
Yeah.
I'm like, I can do any downhill, but I'm going to do it to survive. I'm not going to try like dropping a standee when my heart rate's at 180. It's just like a unnecessary risk in the middle of the nowhere in Georgia.
Yeah, I've heard some stories about what Paul used to do back then, how he would just like rip the chicane. There's this one section at La Liga, for people who don't know, where it's just downhill, round a corner, down another hill. You really have to foot brake it pretty hard. Like it's kind of sketchy. And I'm pretty sure Paul just bolted on through.
Yeah, like I know Jeff tried to just do it and he hurt himself really badly.
Right.
And I was taking it safe this year because I was like, I don't really remember this place. And I think I could have gone a lot faster down it, but it's like in a push race, you don't really need to risk it on a downhill like that, unless it was a shorter push race and it mattered.
Right. You ditched everyone at the hill section this year. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, my specialty was for a while was pushing uphill. And it was like, okay, you get to this 10% gradient and people start running. And I'm like, that's ridiculous. I can push up at like 12 miles per hour up that hill. So like, I was like, whatever. I guess I'm just going solo the whole race because I don't really want to wait for people.
Yeah. Yeah. That's 13 miles into the 56. So it's most of the race. You're by yourself at that point. I think that's a fun point. A little bit of a call out there. People do run up hills at La Liga sometimes. It does happen, even in the front pack. But not Adam, because Adam can push 12 miles per hour up the hill.
I think when I would start running is right around 15 to 20%. Because I have some of these downhills where you like, you just do stand-up slides and you go back up. And some of those you feel like, okay, it would be faster running.
Yeah, for sure. There's like two or three areas I can think of at La Liga that are really steep like that, but they don't last long. So it's almost like
you get momentum through it.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That's fun. Yeah, that's a great place to make an attack and drop the rest of the pack there, I think, going through those hills. Because once you get up and you're kind of like away from them, you just bomb the hill and, extend the lead as much as you can, I guess.
Yeah, Paul was like, you need to save someone that uses a draft mule so you work less. And maybe he was right, but also like, I don't know.
Oh, no, it's great advice, right? But it's also one of those things where it's like nobody knows what's actually going to happen at the event. And like, there's a chance Paul would have done the same thing you did, even knowing he should probably bring someone, right? But it's like, when the time comes and like you have an opportunity, right? You ended up winning the day by quite a bit, so it clearly worked for you. Like,
yeah, I mean, I was just thinking about the overall time too. It's just
yeah.
If I ever find myself waiting, I'm like, maybe I should just go for it. So,
yeah, and you got that overall time. That was exciting. It was an exciting
good
day.
time.
Yeah. That day 3, you had some cyclists kind of like egging you on. It seemed like just like not like egging you on, like just right next to you.
Yeah, I met this nice guy and he rode with me. He's like, "Come on, man, you gotta go faster." And and he's like, "Here, let me stop traffic for you." Well, he didn't stop traffic for me at the intersections, but he was like, "Here, let me go tell you if it's clear."
Wow.
So he'd go ahead and wave me on, and that makes a big difference going through the intersections because this whole race I've been riding kind of relaxed. I didn't think I had a chance at it. And then the last day, I'm like, ooh, I kind of do have a chance at the record. And I was like, well, I should have been blowing the intersections more because slowing and stopping is really one of the biggest things. And then, this guy comes around and it's like, here, man, let me talk to you. Keep it out of your head. I'll ride with you and stop, tell you when the traffic's coming. That was like a big deal.
Huge, yeah. The traffic is really really helpful because then you're just, there's no sort of like cut to your speed at all. It's really fun.
Yeah, and like that makes a huge difference stopping and going. So especially when you get in the busy part and you're getting towards Atlanta, there's cars coming all the time.
Yeah. So back to the wheels, do you think they would be good at something like the Diga? Like, is that like kind of what the idea is, that they're sort of like this all around LDP wheel? You could probably slide with it, take it downhill, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the idea with the Karmas was like, first of all, we have to have clearance. Second of all, let's make it really lightweight, because the problem with big wheels pumping is like the back and forth motion is another acceleration that just doesn't work with big wheels very well.
Right.
Like,
okay.
Big wheels feel slow. It's just like surf skates. You feel the difference between 60 and 70 millimeters. Pumping, you definitely feel the 100 millimeters if you're trying to pump it. So it's like, how do we reduce weight? So we wanted to make something where like La Diga, actually there's not much turning, but there is pumping. So it'd be good if you want to pump. But we want to make something that's like lively and fun to ride around the city too.
Mm-hmm.
The idea behind it is like we're making a grippy, fast accelerating wheel. It'd be great for like Broadway Bomb. I think I'd race it at Broadway Bomb if I do it. And even in like a marathon, I'm fine with it. Maybe like for 100 miles, I'd go for big trucks just because I'm rolling.
Sure.
Big, like not big truck and wheels, not big trucks, but
sure. Yeah. I see what you mean.
Yeah. And then, so the Karmas are just designed to be as lightweight as possible while still having grip, essentially, like predictable, good grip. Mm-hmm. And, we want them to be comfortable. So I guess I'll talk about the design process of it. It was like, we have this specification of it needs to be 92 millimeters to fit all of the setups.
Okay.
And then I was like, okay, let's look into urethane deflection optimization, where there's a certain amount of deflection you can get on. Like, so a urethane is like a spring. The whole thing compresses when you compress it. If you go above a certain percentage, there's a curve you can see of optimizing how much energy it loses. And it's kind of exponential. So I set a goal where we want to keep it before it gets exponential and like the losses you have rolling in urethane.
Okay.
So we have our total sprung area where like your urethane from the core to the outer edge of the wheel compresses. And then you also have another thing called like so that's like the percent deflection. And then you have the total deflection, which is like how much the wheel compresses in millimeters. So it's like, that's like your travel. A comfortable wheel travels a certain amount in millimeters every time you hit a bump. So you have like, so I tested all these wheels and found like calculated, you can create a model of it, like how a wheel's going to feel from the lip size, the core size, the thane depth, the durometer of the urethane. And you can get a very good calculation of how comfortable it is and how much it deflects. So I made an entire chart of every wheel we could have in the industry, how it feels, and then the efficiency of it. And I was like, okay, we don't want to make this wheel feel too soft and we don't want to make it feel too hard. So I used this, like essentially you can design the thane depth though, so it doesn't flex enough to become inefficient from like that cutoff point I have. Mm-hmm. And then you also want a certain amount of deflection, which means you got to adjust the contact patch size and the durometer to get the wheel to compress the way you want it. So it feels a certain level of comfortableness in that total travel. So then we designed the core and the patch, and mostly the core, to have the perfect urethane depth where we can have still an efficient wheel and still have it comfortable, but have the core be as large as possible. And it's really not terribly different than the seismic megawatt numbers wise. Like when you look at the numbers, like seismic, I don't know if they calculated it, but like they're pretty spot on too. But for Jeff and I, we did some a little bit more adjustments and stuff. So like I had a curve that's like, you have this curve of contact patch, durometer, all these different things. And then I tried to align them all so that way we can have everything. We can have pretty light. We can have pretty good rolling resistance, and then we can have pretty good comfort.
Gotcha.
So like basically the wheel was designed from the ground up to be as light as possible while still being comfortable, while not losing too much energy. And then from there we designed the lips to make sure they grip well and are predictable sliding and stuff. And I
Okay.
wouldn't say predictable sliding, but they're more like we want good grip that doesn't give away instantly. Maybe it's not a free ride wheel in that sort of sense, but like it's a good grippy wheel.
Cool. So yeah, it sounds you have this concept, right? You have a 92 millimeter wheel. That was sort of your outer bound, right? And you're like, okay, has to be light. Best way to make it light is to make the core pretty big, right? Ideally,
Yeah,
right?
and
Like,
adjust the contact patch. Yeah.
yeah, and then yeah, okay, so you adjust the contact patch, which makes, for those who may not be super familiar, that's like making the wheel thinner when you like look down at it, essentially. And then you have this other concept, right, of like the wheel compresses a certain amount based on the type of urethane and the durometer. Is that correct?
Yeah, mostly the durometer, honestly.
Okay. And then that, based on like all that research you did, you sort of found the sweet spot between all these factors. And that's, at the end, you said sort of like the lips are designed a certain way to catch and release the grip.
Yeah, exactly. And I have like this chart of durometer versus all these sizes, and we're like, well, for a durability sake, we don't want to go lower than a certain amount. So then you adjust everything. So the durometer matches up really well with the rolling resistance and the durability that you would want.
Wow.
And using that, you could like use these curves to figure out, on paper how you'd want to do wheels. And you could adjust other aspects to make it fit the core and stuff well. But for this one, the core is designed perfectly so that way the wheel's lightweight, but still has a lot of like comfort and grip to it.
That's so neat. You like devised a whole system for developing wheels. That's super cool.
Well, like the thing is, it's a lot like that jazz thing I said earlier, where it's like you got to know the rules before you break them.
Yeah. Cool.
Like there's a lot of conventions with wheels, and they're all there for some reasons, and maybe they don't have exactly the right idea behind them, but like good wheels are good wheels for a reason. So like it's not like groundbreakingly different, but it's like fine tuning it as much as possible. So like, I feel bad because it's like Seismic just released this 90 millimeter wheel, and Jeff doesn't have anything against Seismic. We love Seismic. Seismic's like, they're like the wheel guys
Yeah.
for LDP, and they have been for a long time. But Jeff's like, I need to make money. I need to make a cool wheel. And I'm like, well, this is just like how we can do it numbers wise to be perfect. And it's honestly pretty close to the Seismics. Like, but we got some edge on it in some ways that we wanted, and it performs exactly how we want. And I'm really happy about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think someday we'd like to do just like a no constraints at all, just design a really sick wheel how I want it.
Ooh.
Like maybe like, but that's really like a financial thing. Wheels cost so much to make. That's the other thing. It's really cool that Jeff let me get in on this and work on CAD designs with him, and like go really from the ground up designing the wheel. Like something we did is designing the core as like, hey man, this Nautilus pattern, we could proposing it with a little bump in it, so that way it could still hold Kegel cores for electric boards, because it's like you're going to want to keep the e-board market there.
Mm-hmm.
And it technically it could, but we added 1 millimeter to the bearing seat because Titus kept breaking Kegel cores.
Titus.
And we're like, I mean, Titus is kind of like hucking 5 stairs with Kegels. So it's like, well, I don't know if Titus is a great example of LDP people, but we're like, you know what? We're not going to settle. Let's just cut off the entire possibility of making revenue off the e-board market out of principle to make a solid wheel. Which is maybe financially not smart, but I think from an ethics standpoint, it's just like Jeff's always trying to make the best thing.
Yeah, that's a great example of doing just that. It's so tough though, right? Like missing out on that revenue for a company like Jeff's, as you said, like he's just making stuff. Like he's not some big company, right? Like,
yeah, the investment is insane. Like when you think about how much it costs, because you're like, how much could it cost to make a wheel? But when you make a wheel, you don't have just one mold for one wheel. This is a factory. So you've got to CNC like 20 molds. And when you CNC something, it costs like, aluminum something, but with these wheel molds are made out of steel. So like then you're doing 10 molds for wheels, CNC'd out of steel, 400 each. It like becomes $10,000, $15,000 just to make something new.
Right. That's a huge investment. Huge investment.
Yeah. So like the fact that Jeff was like, yeah, let's make something new and not do something tried and true is like, it is a big risk. That's why people use stuff that already exists.
Right. Right.
And this is why we're like, okay, we got to really like not just guess. Because like people like Seismic are awesome because they have so much industry experience and they have, I keep going back to them because they're really the only people who make like things from scratch.
Sure. They have so many different wheels too. It's really cool.
Yeah. People like Seismic have a lot of experience and we're like, well, we gotta make experience by we know stuff about wheels, but we gotta also like let's be calculated and do everything as efficiently as possible. And it's fun because doing the lip dynamics, you can like model lip dynamics and stuff. And I'm like, I don't know if this groove does anything. Let's adjust it. And then I'll plug it in and model it more and more until we get like, all right, this is good. And then that way we don't have to make another, oh, oops, let's make another $1,000 mold.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're just doing all this in like a CAD program. You said like just like 3D modeling on the computer.
Yeah, just we use like Jeff uses Fusion. I use Onshape because it's free.
Okay.
Stuff like that. And then like I have experience with groundwater modeling and other stuff, so it's really not that hard for me to go into other programs because at the end of the day it's very similar software wise. So
Yeah, that's super neat. Utilizing all your skills.
yeah.
Yeah. Do some skateboard science experiments.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff you could do with wheels. They're just a lot of voodoo. I mean, just testing all these wheels to come up with a chart to figure out how we wanted our wheels to feel. I was like, man, only Seismic gets the durometer right. Everyone's just like guessing this.
Yeah, yeah, that's a cool perspective. You know, like even you said though, like all durometers aren't created equal. Like they can give it a rating all they want, but it comes down to what it actually is, right? Like,
I mean, I probably shouldn't get into like, I'm not shit talking, but so like BOA/88 Wheel Co. You know, for a while they're like, these McFlys are so comfortable. This is groundbreaking urethane. You test any McFly, like stock McFly, they're all 80A. I mean, sorry, they're all 70A.
really?
They say they're like in the mid ranges. Essentially, it's like we found out it's just like not true. Durometer makes a bigger difference than you'd think. All these McFlys are 70A. And then like I was like, huh. Let me look at this BOA 83A 100 millimeter they're advertising, and the advertising material says, because it's like an e-board wheel, it's like durable like an 83A wheel.
Like an 83A.
But rides like a 78A. And then I test it and it's literally just 78A.
Okay.
So they're saying it's 83A on the packaging, but it's just like, no, it literally is a 78A wheel. And that's how they say that it rides like a 78A
It's
wheel.
weird. Yeah, weird that they wouldn't just say it's 78A. Like,
yeah, and then like I test other wheels and I'm like, oh, it's either urethane depth or the durometer's off. That's like the two things when they feel different. One of the two. I was like cutting cores in half to measure the urethane depth and everything.
oh, that's so fun. You straight up just saw them in half?
Yeah, with the handsaw, it's the worst. It takes forever.
I was going to say that,
you know,
that doesn't sound like the right way to do it.
if I had a bandsaw, I'd do it, but
Okay.
I don't have a bandsaw anymore.
I thought maybe you had a connection to just.
I used to have a connection with hydraulic presses and all these tools, but now I don't. Now I live in Wisconsin, so.
Okay. Yeah, because you were making like you were saying you made a post actually yesterday. I think it was like I used to have to mod all my stuff and make my own things. Now I don't have to anymore. And you were like making brackets, weren't you? Like machining like trucks and stuff together. What were you doing?
Yeah, I was making brackets. I'd buy aluminum because aluminum is really cheap actually, and then I just machine it in a way where I wouldn't create too large of bends for it to break unsafely. And I use that to make all my brackets because I wanted lower brackets for pushing on bigger wheels.
Oh, interesting.
These days, I'm really not riding brackets as much. I think they're nice still, like on the Wiggler. I really enjoy them. But like the reality is that like, especially for me, like wood is good because I like flex. And
wood is
the more
good.
flex I can get. Yeah, like wood is just a great engineering material when you think about it. And then when you add fiberglass, it's great.
Yeah, and like this whole idea like of the board being one piece, I think is good too. Like the bracket is awesome because it does do what it intends to do, but something about being like I don't know, having that like connection to where the truck is mounted it feels better to me on like the supersonic.
Yeah, and like a lot of it is have brackets, they really transmit the vibration in there because they reduce your flexing base by half. And wood is a dampening material, and a metal is not a dampening material.
Oh,
You got all
okay.
these things that, like, like you shorten the wheelbase by half essentially by introducing two stiff brackets. And then you like have half the flex that absorb issues and half the dampening materials that absorb the uncomfortable pavement. So there's a lot of reasons. Like brackets are great if you want a stiff pumper because like with those Mellon CAC boards,
Mm-hmm.
Malone CAC boards, it's like those are stiffer pumping boards. So they make a lot of sense with brackets because you just want a nice stiff, slight flex for those pumping. But for me, riding, I'm like more of a comfort guy. I'm pushing. I'm primarily a pusher, not really a pumper. And I like having comfort. So I'm more of a all wood type of board guy, wood and fiberglass.
You can get pretty long wheelbases, right, with a bracket setup, but I guess what you're saying is it's still mounted on the board, right?
Yeah,
and the board
exactly.
itself is smaller, which makes it more of a bumpy ride, essentially.
Yeah. You just have less material that is flexing and absorbing bumps in the end of the day. And for me, the brackets are just more uncomfortable. And actually, like per unit strength, wood is actually really strong.
Sure, yeah.
It's like wood and fiberglass is very strong.
It's hard to break wood, especially along the grain or against the grain, right? Which is what you'd have to do to break a skateboard.
So like with a supersonic, it's like it's probably the best way to be lightweight and also have flex. I can't see a world where brackets are better than the supersonic. Yeah, I mean they are in some ways clearance wise, but like if you want like just a really lightweight top mount pusher, like brackets aren't going to be better comfort wise, or at least
it's a great thing to have in your quiver. Like get the bracket set up if you can. But I haven't touched mine since getting the supersonic. Like I don't really want to either. I've never really been able to dial in a really good pump setup on the bracket. I know you can. I just haven't been able to do it. And I don't love having a torsion tail rear, especially around here. We have rollers, like I like to bomb the hills if I can. And, I used to slide so much before I had the bracket, just around town. Like we called it free push, which I think some people have used that phrase before too, because there was so much like fun little areas just to like whip around, like slide down this little section and then you go on your push. Then you find another little hill, right? And like you need a setup that can do it all.
Yeah, and it just doesn't work with brackets.
Yeah, it does not work with the bracket. You kind of need to be able to spin around.
You can break them. I have bent my my deep drop brackets.
Have you?
Them. Like they're crooked now.
They're not supposed to slide. Yeah, that's the thing. Like they don't really. It's kind of this thing you said with the wood and the metal. Like the metal, once it bends, it's kind of bent. With the wood, it flexes back to this like, it might warp, but you put pressure on it and it kind of settles.
And also like just the hanging up factor as someone who rides over very large potholes, like, I was saying, like I'm like 3-inch deep holes, 4-inch deep holes, the size of my wheel. It's like the brackets are another thing to get hung up on in a kind of catastrophic way. So.
You also need 8 more bolts, and the bolts that go, in the board are like the things that would get hung up. So you need to make sure they're like a certain length. If they're too long, you're bound to like hit something. And
and it puts funny stresses on boards, and some people have problems with breaking bracket boards. So
yeah, all of this to say, there's nothing wrong with a bracket board, but there is. We just pointed it out.
I think if I lived in Europe. And I had bike paths that I could pump on and stuff.
Right.
More. Like, I mean, I have bike paths, but they're not really like, it's a little different. They're hilly. I just can't pump on them unless I'm going downhill. And it's like, if I'm going downhill, I can still push. Mm-hmm. So like I can push really fast. Like on flat, I can push to 23 and probably like 25, 26 miles per hour. I'm fine pushing. And at that point, I'm not pumping anyway. So I don't do a ton of pumping. But like if I was in, maybe if it's in Europe and I got more into pumping, I'd have a bracket set up.
You mentioned
or like a wiggler.
Yeah, that's a good one. You mentioned you don't do a lot of pumping, and this reminded me of something that I heard in the interview that Jeff and Paul did together during the push relay. and they talked about how Paul was saying how he thinks pushing is actually more efficient when you're trying to like reach those top speeds. And like the example he even gave was you at Ultra Skate. You didn't pump that much for your 300, mostly push. Do you have anything sort of to say on that, like pumping versus pushing, as far as trying to reach that sort of like 12.5, 13 mile per hour speed and holding it?
Yeah, I mean, so my stance with pumping is like I pump well, but I don't pump like Eric Palmer.
Sure.
So like I have this idea that like for me, numbers wise, it's obvious that I need to be pushing and not pumping. It's just like when I look at the numbers, for me, the efficiency I run at, it makes more sense to push. For somebody like Eric Palmer or like Clark Blumenstein, those are kind of my two like golden examples of people who pump well. They seem to pump at an efficiency that's equal to pushing. And Clark, I think, pumps way more efficient than he can push even. So I think like once you get dialed and you really have a good pumping, especially top mount setup, I think there is a way to be really efficient. And I'm trying to like, I've always been exploring that and trying to get to that point, because switching it up would be good. But for the average person, I don't know if pumping is that efficient at like 13, 14 miles per hour. I think at like 8 or 9, it is pretty efficient sometimes, but it's hard. Like the thing is you just have mechanical losses. Like
Right.
pushing the ground is like the most possible efficient motion you could be doing, unless you're pushing too fast and you're overexerting yourself, which isn't really an issue at ultra speeds.
Yeah.
And then like pumping, there's a lot of like sideways motions, gear ratio reductions. Like there's a lot of places where you could lose energy in the bushings and stuff.
I talked to Jeff about it because I asked him basically the same thing I just asked you. And it was like, you know, it really depends on your goal. Like if you are going for 300, consider like what Adam just said. Like how are you, what is your most efficient? Like run the numbers. How do you work best? It's you probably going to be pushing. But like if your goal is like, I want to get 100 miles this year, or I want to get whatever, like skate for this amount of hours, like you need to use all of the things at your disposal, right? You want to make sure you're spreading the load, pumping when you can, switching feet and all that, right? Like it depends on your goal. It's not to say pumping's bad, pumping's not as efficient. There's nothing, it's not really what we're saying. It's more like, you know, maybe at a certain speed. Yeah. Consider like your speed before you sort of want to decide if you're going to pump or not.
I think pumping, I'm like in search of this golden ratio of like, I want to find the perfect way to pump. And until I find it, I'm not really utilizing it in races, but like, like I'm always in search of like becoming as efficient as possible. And for now, it's not working for me. And that might just be a me thing. I think with Eric Palmer and Clark Blumenstein, they've figured out a great way to pump. And I just like, I don't have the training. I don't have the practice in getting super efficient in that sort of pumping way. But I think there is a world to be explored in pumping where you could use the ratios, kind of like a bicycle. Sometimes you just need a gear ratio, but I haven't quite figured that out yet.
Yeah. There's a lot to discover, I feel like, with all that. You have a great video on pumping techniques, so if people want to learn more, definitely check that out. I loved it. I thought it was really cool how you kind of did this sort of like bird's eye view of what the pump looks like, and nice little sciencey talk. I think we need more stuff like that, in the scene.
Yeah,
right.
I don't want it to be voodoo.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of voodoo in longboarding, and that's something I've always not liked. I mean, like, there's a lot of feel and holistic experiences obviously are there for a reason, because they're developed on real results a lot of the times. But like, I'm like a numbers guy. So
yeah,
I would love to like visualize and explain things and not just say like, you got to feel like this.
I like what you say about practicing too. Like even you, like you've skated many hours, and you even say like, I need to practice this more. I don't know much about my abilities to pump, like the best pumping technique. Like, and that's just it. Like all this stuff takes time. Like getting a good push technique, getting a good pump technique. So you could be someone who's like skated for years and years. You put hours in, skated many miles. You can skate switch, whatever. and then like you try and pump and you're like, oh, this is not nearly as efficient. It's like, of course not. You haven't been practicing the pump all those years maybe, or like really consider how much time you've spent on something and like put it in perspective. Like everything takes time, you know?
Yeah, like it's not getting stuck in your ways and exploring new things, and then also spending enough time to continue to improve it though. Also, you can't just like change something every day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, you talk about changing your setups too, right? Like you mentioned that, like I change my setup every day, and that's important, right? It's important to dial in a setup, know how to dial in a setup, but you also have to like give everything a chance, right? Like,
Yeah, which is
if you
hard.
go out and ride and you're like, it's so hard to know, right? Like, is this really not good, or am I just kind of not used to it yet? How many miles do I have to put in before I realize this isn't it? It just takes time, and that's the hardest part, is putting in the time.
Yeah, and then it's funny because also like I love messing with setups, but I'm also not picky about setups. Like I'm fine riding a trash setup. Like I have some really fine-tuned setups, and sometimes I'm like, whatever, I'll ride crappy Randalls with loose kingpins. I don't care. So
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, I want to improve things, but also like I'm not picky about what I'm riding. But if I can improve it, I'll be doing it, you know.
Speaking of loose kingpins, those Alston trucks, you have those, right? You've ridden those.
Oh yeah, you got to buy non-standard kingpins for them to not to be loose. Yeah,
I kind of like them loose. I'm not gonna lie, because with the Don't Trips, they've always gotten stuck on me. I've been riding Don't Trips for so long, and like maybe don't take the best care of them, so they've rusted a little bit in places, making the kingpin nearly impossible to get out. Many people have encountered this, I'm sure. So when I got those trucks and it was like, oh shit, this thing just slides right out. Like, this is great. You know?
Yeah, you could get aircraft grade ones, and they're just slightly larger in diameter, and they're a little tighter in the Alsons, and they still come out.
Oh, they do. Okay, I'll have to get those.
These are like the galvanic corrosion, probably with the aluminum and the steel kingpin. Probably like the Don't Trips get stuck in there.
That's what's happening, yeah. Because it just gets that little crustiness to it, you know? Right.
Yeah, I mean, like with that, when you have different types of metals with each other, the electrons flow through them and actually create like corrosion where they become bonded. So it's like having steel in contact with aluminum is kind of a no-no from an engineering standpoint. I mean, it's fine, but like...
Wow, I didn't know that. I didn't know that like the metal is literally fusing itself because they're just like... really close to each other. And is it like pressure or?
Well, when you have two different types of metals, they have different chemical structures essentially. Mm-hmm. So then the electrons want to flow between them because they have different charges.
Oh, neat.
So like as they corrode, they actually want to combine each other and the electrons flow between them. And then it's like galvanic corrosion happens. So
that's so cool. It's like a fossilized Don't Trip truck. You could like hide it away for thousands of years. And it would just become one.
Yeah, it's always interesting, like the uses of metals and stuff in skating.
Yeah. I'm going to remember that now. Don't combine metals. That's why my kingpins are stuck.
Yep.
Yeah. The science of skateboard trucks, you know, it's a tricky thing, right? Like, not just that, but also like reverse kingpin, traditional kingpin, the angle. Like, what are all these things doing? Like, I feel like that's another really good topic for someone to do a video on. I don't know.
Oh yeah, I could do that. That one's like a little bit more contentious.
Well, you know, you don't necessarily have to like say what is better. Just explain how it works. Maybe is that still contentious? Or
with pumping, I'm like, this is how it works. With the trucks, I'm like, people have opinions.
Really? Cool.
You know, like if people are like, this is how it works, and I'm like, I mean, maybe.
Yeah,
it'd be cool to have hard evidence.
Yeah. Again, enough of the voodoo.
Yeah, it's a whole thing. Like, I don't know. The truck science is kind of complicated, if you want to call it that. It's people don't have a full grasp on it. Like, what's a TKP? What's an RKP? What's a RKP with a shit ton of rake versus a TKP with little rake? Like, they start kind of blend together. It's like a sliding scale.
For me, I just kind of look at the truck and its angle with the ground, and I'm like, that looks about right. You know?
Yeah, the trucks are like just a crazy thing. They're like that for a reason though.
Sure. Yeah.
That's what I'll say. It's like that. I'm gonna go back to the jazz thing again. I gotta know the rules, to break the rules. And e-boards are like out here, like we're gonna redesign the longboard, we're gonna redesign the skateboard, and they're like, we don't know what we're doing, so we're just gonna make these heinous things that are different, but like worse, objectively worse, because they don't understand why we want it this way.
It's kind of like you said, just making things for the sake of it, like.
And then you have like Rojas and Valkyrie and like those types of things where they do redesign the truck in a way, like with that Valkyrie designs. But they understand real longboards and why we want it that way. Sure. And they improve on it, and they don't like ignore everything else and fuck it up like those e-board trucks you see around where they're like, hey guys, we're gonna make a cool truck.
Yeah. That's just a product of it getting bigger. There's always going to be some people out there just trying to like capitalize, right? And like, or just be revolutionary for the sake of it, or innovative without really thinking too hard.
Exactly. And that's what we're trying not to do with the Karma wheel. It's like the e-board wheels, a lot of times people are like, dang, e-board wheels suck. And a lot of the times it's because like they're like, yeah, man, this wheel has tons of grip, but then it also has a ton of like randomly releasing and trying to kill you. And that's just not something like you get when you come into something new. And that's why I like working with Jeff, first of all. He's actually experienced at longboarding. And these I don't know, like designing a wheel to grip and understand why we do it is such a great thing. And I think like big wheels have a lot to go. Like this Karma wheel is like a really good 92 millimeter wheel. And I think like the Megawatt was the first really bigger than 85 millimeter wheel where it's like, dang, I could ride this around corners fast. That was kind of like a landmark. And I think eventually we'll reach a point where we'll get better 100 millimeter wheels that don't have as many trade-offs to being like, yeah, you can roll fast, but it's hard to pump and sketchy around corners.
Sure. Yeah. I think about like inline skaters and their wheels, they're really thin, but it's a different mechanism, right? They have 8 wheels on their feet. It's different, but the size is like 100 to 110, right? So like,
yeah, they go up to like 120. I thought about that a lot, and they had some numbers on like why they use durometers, and it's like this goes back to that contact patch and like deformation thing I was talking about. They have smaller contact patches. They adjust the durometer higher. Sometimes skating bases their durometer off of the inline skating stuff in a bad way, or like vice versa. But like with the inline skates, people have asked me, why don't you try riding inline skates? Well, first of all, like there's no lip to flex, which means like, inline skates, the pressure is always going directly into the top of the wheel. They're not designed to have like the side forces, because when they're moving, they're exactly putting it down where they need to be.
That's a good point.
So like inline skates, don't use them. And then they also track in cracks. So like, big wheels, the larger contact patch allows you to roll over uneven surfaces because it redistributes itself. But like the inline skates, when you hit a crack, you're dead.
You're stuck in it. Yeah.
Yeah. Like inline skates, they can just lift their foot. We can't lift our foot. We got to roll over things.
Yeah. The pressure thing is interesting too, right? Like because it's such a thin wheel and their feet are just right on top of the wheels. Whereas if you were put those wheels on a skateboard, your pressure is like in the middle of all 4 of them, right? It's not like on top of anything. And that's likely just to send you sideways.
Like Andy tried that. He tried using inline skates at one point, and he was like, this is a bad idea. Don't do it.
Yeah. Seems risky.
Yeah, like we need lip flex and all these things to make a wheel survivable and not scary. Even though like people get hung up in the numbers because they're like, a lot of LDP people just go straight. They don't need to they don't worry about grip as much as I do, or like Titus does.
Sure.
A lot, some people like who are new to it just think about, I want to be lightweight. And they don't really think about all the other things, which goes back to you need to know everything before you start improvising. Like, yes, it's lightweight, but there's reasons why.
Yeah.
We don't want to do that.
Yeah. It's like this whole understanding all the terrain and like just being prepared for that. It's funny, like the whole rules theme here is really coming back.
Yeah. And the thing with rules and longboarding is some people understand the rules and just use those rules. My goal is to understand the rules and break them as much as possible, because I have nothing to gain from doing what everyone else is doing. Like now that I've gotten where I am speed wise, it's like, like I have optimized my setups. So it's like if I'm just doing everything else everyone else is doing, what do I get out of it? I might as well try new things, even though I'll have a lot of duds. Maybe I'll find something new that I like. But for someone who's new to it, you don't want to be breaking the rules like that. Like maybe see what feels good first instead of just immediately going into it and like, hey, I'm going to just try this wild thing that's going to feel awful and maybe not work.
Sure. Yeah.
Which is why you ask more experienced people for things. But then in longboarding, sometimes we've gotten way too stuck into like anecdotes and believing things that we don't have evidence for.
Right. That's that voodoo we talk about. And to some degree, you know, like you gotta believe in something, right? And like just try it out at a certain point. Like the only way to know if something works is to pretend it works, try it, and then see if it actually did, right? Like actually do an experiment kind of thing.
Yeah, like I've had like the opposite spectrum where I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna make a lightweight board, lightweight as possible. I have this setup with like balloons and stuff that weighs.
Oh wow!
I have a 3.9 pound complete setup, which is 1/3 the weight of some people's setups. Like it's crazy light, hollow cord deck I made, the magnesium trucks, balloons, and a full ceramic bearings just to be lightweight. It rides like crap. I hate it.
Yeah.
Like I like completely like spent my time devoting myself to, I'm going to make the lightest setup possible. And I'm like, wow, this sucks.
Yeah.
So I've gone like all the directions, but sometimes it just doesn't work out. And that's where you want to ask someone else who's tried it already.
Yeah. Those balloons were the hotness for so long for like free riding and stuff. People loved them.
Yeah, man. What did I do with those? Yeah, I used to commute on like the yellow ones, like 86A. 86A.
Yellow is 86, yeah.
And they seemed pretty big at the time, but that's like miserable to ride on actually.
Yeah. Yeah, it was like one of the first wheels that had that core too. And they kept falling off the core. They were like,
you know, that one's an inline skate core actually.
Is it really?
Yeah, which is another reason why like, yeah, you think the inline skates are going to be good. Nope.
Yeah.
Don't do it. Don't do it, guys.
All right. So I have a couple questions before we sort of sign off here that I want to make sure I ask you. Is there anything you want to say that we didn't cover that is maybe not skateboarding related, but you want to make sure we get out there on this show? Anything on your mind that we didn't touch?
I don't know. I feel like it'd be fun to talk again sometime, but
yeah, I don't think we talked about everything.
Yeah, I almost feel like we could split this up. We got so many topics.
Yeah, we could talk more. So you want to come back then? You'd be down to come back on the show?
Yeah, definitely. It's fun just talking about longboarding. So
yeah. There was potential idea that I spoke with Gavin about like bringing on a panel of experienced skateboarders and being like, let's get a bunch of like questions for people to submit, maybe some tips for them to submit too, like other experienced people, and then have sort of the panel elaborate on either those questions or the tips and like, you know, do sort of like a beginner's friendly.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Let's see. What do I got? I don't have a lot. I mean, I like ultra, but I guess something I like to say is that like I feel like there's so much more to distance skating. We focus too much on ultra sometimes.
Mm-hmm. That's so valid. Yeah, I find I talk about it a lot with people on this show, and like it's one of those topics you can just keep going and going and going, and like it just ends up being a big thing, you know. And like part of the reason why it's the only event that's fired every year for the past 10 years, you know, maybe aside from La Diga if you count the COVID break. Like,
yeah, exactly. I like I've been really into the marathon. That's always been the thing I cared about. So ultra is kind of that thing where I'm like, I care about it because it's the race.
Yeah.
But like the marathon consumes me.
Okay. So you would like there to be a marathon again, another marathon series? Yeah.
So this year they're finally having one at skate camp. That's going to be like an official timed one. Yeah. So I'm going ham at that one. So
you're going to be there. You're going to be at skate camp? Oh, yeah, that's the plan. Sick.
Scott was like, yeah, I'm going to do an official timed one. And I was like, okay, I'll be there.
That's awesome. Yeah. We just spoke about skate camp in the last episode with Gavin. So that's great to hear you're going to be there. I was guilt tripped by Adam. I mean, sorry, not by Adam, by Gavin. He might get me to come down, but I don't know. I have a lot going on this fall.
Same.
But that sounds like a really fun trip. You're going to try and do the marathon and really go hard for it. That's the next thing on your agenda, kind of.
Yeah, that's the goal. I think the marathon has a lot to improve on. Like Paul and Jeff set really fast times, but they were never at their best. Like it was always like somebody was sick, somebody was doing something.
Dude, the marathon is such a great distance too. Like everyone knows what a marathon is and be like, oh, I ran a marathon. I ran a half marathon. But if you're like, oh, I skateboarded a marathon, it's like something people would seek out much more so than a 24-hour ultra skate, unfortunately.
Yeah, I feel like marathons are just like, it's a great distance, and it's like important to have something other than a crazy ultra endurance event. That's kind of a festival for like the regular person sometimes.
And it's over with by the afternoon. You don't have to spend all day on the skateboard. It's great.
Yeah, which is nice, but also then you get less time to socialize. So,
well, here's the thing: when the ride is like that opens up that whole day for like
activities. Yeah,
get some food. Yeah, get some like food trucks or something. I remember at the Centennial Skate Fest, that's exactly what it was. It was a skate fest. So we had like 8-mile race one night. Next day there were like food trucks and stuff after the two, like it was like a 5K and a half marathon or something, right? And then the rest of the day was like you get food, you hang out in the park. It was really fun, and like you got a lot of socializing in then. Whereas at ultra, it's like
you're out.
You get to a point where you're so tired you can't socialize, and it's not like you miss out on fun on anything. It's just you can't really capitalize like you can when you have your wits about you. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's like I'm ready to go once ultra's over.
Yeah, it's so hard. Yeah, and it sucks in that way because you're just I want to get home. I don't want to be around anyone. I want to go to sleep, and then I want to hang out with everyone. But by that point, everyone's gone.
Yeah, exactly.
I would love there to be more marathons. Really cool that Scott's doing that skate camp down in Florida. Check it out if you're in the area. If you want to do a marathon, this is a great opportunity. There should be more, definitely.
Yeah, I just wish there was more opportunities to show speed other than Broadway Bomb. Like Broadway Bomb's awesome, and I really want to make it to Central Park skate race, but like Broadway Bomb, I'm just like going slow as heck, trying not to get lost.
Yeah.
It's just like stop and go and like, where am I going? Follow Titus. And it's like Jeff and Paul did terrible at Broadway Bomb too. I don't know if they even got into the top 3, so I'm pretty happy with third.
Mm-hmm. But Broadway Bomb, it's like such another thing, right? It's not like a sprint race. It's like an outlaw race, which is it's still sprinting, but it's not like you're on a trail and it's closed off for you guys to ride or anything like that. Like that's a whole nother ball game where it's like this is a 5K, 10K or something, and it's like 5K is over in 10 minutes. Like crazy shit, you know what I mean? Like I would love more of that. There used to be a lot of that, like a lot of family friendly events going on pre-COVID, right?
Yeah, exactly. Family friendly is the thing. Like I want to grow the sport eventually. I don't know how.
I think
I could probably work on that, but like we need to be more family friendly sometimes. Like ultra skate is, I think it's a good family friendly event, but it's not the type of thing you're going to be like, hey honey, let's just do a weekend at this 5K I heard about.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a little different.
I think that it's like two factors, right? About growing the sport is like family friendly events. It makes it accessible even for like adults. They'll be like, oh, my kid wants to ride this 5K. And then all of a sudden the dad is like picking up his old skateboard, or the mom, whoever is picking up their own skateboard, and I think that's a really cool element to add to it that you wouldn't really get from 24 hours. It's hard to be accessible, right? Especially when it costs $100 to enter and stuff like that. These family friendly events down at the beach, stuff like that is super accessible, right? And
yeah, that's my goal eventually. It's like right now I understand that like I'm making videos and I need to make more videos, but it's just a busy time in my life, getting married soon. But like it's just like
you're doing a great job. Yeah.
It's just like the sport, we need to be a little bit more family friendly to get people there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think your videos are really good though. That's sort of the other element is there's good content. There's a really good video for Ultra Skate, right? The Push 300. And there's other ones too. You've done really good one. Other people have posted videos of Ultra Skate, which is awesome. I watch all that shit, even when it's just like one lap at Ultra and it's just some guy or some person, just filming with no music or anything. I love that. It gets me in the zone. But like,
Yeah.
if we had a full production level, like well done video every year that was on YouTube for Ultra, I think more people would know about the sport, and that would help grow it.
Yeah. I mean, people just need to take videos and put it in a folder and I'll edit it. Just like I have the hardest time filming Ultra Skate because I'm freaking dying the whole time.
That's a tough example to like even a smaller event. Any event that fires should have a video that goes with it so we can just spread the word.
Yeah, that's the hard part of the New York scene. It's like there's so much going on in New York, but you only see it in stories.
Yeah. You only see it in Instagram stories, maybe the occasional post.
Or like a full race replay with no edits.
Oh, I love Daniel Lindsay's Broadway Bomb video. I don't know if you've seen it.
Oh yeah, that was awesome. I wish I could afford a 360 camera like that. It's so sick.
He's cruising. It's so...
Daniel Lindsay is extremely talented. He's so fast.
Yeah. He has a great video on YouTube. Definitely check that out. He's going really fast. It looks super scary because it's the 360 cam plus the dude's flying.
He knows those roads.
Yeah. Is he from New York or?
He's from New Jersey, and I think he goes the route in New York.
Oh, fellow Jersey boy.
So he's not a local, but he seems to really know the streets when he's racing it because he is flying.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm glad you helped with the host Ladiga. When I do everything I've wanted to, I think I need to like pay it forward and start volunteering.
I mean, that'll come naturally, and like the fact that you do the videos though, bro, like that is already paying it forward, like you're the guy who's been winning, like you're super humble. Like that's enough. You know what I mean? Like super approachable. Like anyone can talk to you, I'm sure you give them the time of day. Like you're not, awesome to hear you say that. But you shouldn't feel like you have to do anything. You know what I mean?
Eventually I want to set up races and help other people get into it.
Right.
Like
and
Jeff.
You want to,
people
right?
forget that Jeff was fast as shit. Some people don't even know Jeff raced.
Right. It's kind of falling out of the know, like that Jeff was this top dog in the scene, winning all those Adrenalinas and stuff like that.
Yeah, I'm making a video about the Adrenalina series I want to release
before
this virtual race marathon comes out because I set a really fast time for that and I need to make like a background on the marathon.
Can I put that in the podcast? Or do I have to edit that out?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, you can put that in. Then also I'm making a video about Ultra Skate eventually this year because Jeff took footage and he hasn't done anything with it. But
awesome.
We'll see when it happens.
Yeah. The dates just got announced for those who may not know, but you probably should know by the time this comes out. February 15, 16, 2024. Miami Ultra Skate.
You're gonna have to split this podcast into 2 1-hour podcasts.
I might just do a long one. Gavin gave me the okay.
Awesome.
He said it's okay to do long ones, so this will just be another long one. Yeah.
Yeah. This Ultra Skate's gonna be brutal because it's Thursday, Friday. I don't know how that's gonna impact people. I think people should be aware that it's Valentine's Day week. So like, who knows what it's gonna be like getting hotels, and then it's also the International Boat Show again. So like, who knows about hotels?
Damn.
And it's all weekdays, so I hope the turnout's good. I think this is the year we're gonna get good weather, and midnight is my birthday this year at Ultra Skate. So
that's right. Cool.
It's gonna be sweet.
February 16. You're turning how old? How old are you?
27. Oh man, God.
Nice.
Crazy.
Yeah. No, that's great, man. Last question: is there any social media you want to plug for?
Oh yeah, I have the Instagram called @BlueRidgeProject. Because I used to live in the mountains, the Blue Ridge Mountains, and there used to be more of us. So it was like the Blue Ridge Project to show people you could skate in the mountains. But now I live in Wisconsin, and that's a bit of like a weird identity thing. I wish I could change it to like Blue Ridge Longboard Project or something. But yeah, we got Blue Ridge Longboard Project on YouTube and Blue Ridge Project on Instagram. And those are kind of like my skate pages.
Nice.
Because I like to keep my personal life a little separate from skating.
Yeah, that's valid. That's valid. Managing multiple Instagram accounts is tough.
God, yeah. I mean, two's enough. I can't imagine.
It sounds like such a silly thing to complain about. Oh, I got all these Instagram accounts, man. But like, it's like, oh, I got a notification from which one? Like, who's messaging me where? Like, it's fun.
It's just like dumb little things. They're like, oh shoot, I just messaged somebody with.
Yeah. You like, I'll see something on one account and be like, oh, I gotta show someone, and then they're like, why did you just open up another chat with me? Like we already have the normal one, you know what I mean? Like just adds to the confusion.
Like I begrudgingly do social media. I'm not really a huge fan of it. I need to do it more, but I've kind of transitioned to YouTube where it's like I'm gonna release high quality things on YouTube, and it seems to be working. That pumping video already has like 10,000 views.
That pumping video is amazing. Honestly, yeah, stuff like that, just keep putting it out. Like it adds up and you build this huge catalog of great content. And you shouldn't necessarily do Instagram is awesome because it's free advertising, but you shouldn't just do it because of that. Like if you'd rather do YouTube, just put your energy into that. You only have so much time in your day.
I used to post like 3 times a week or something, and now I'm like, I'll post once in a while so people know I'm alive.
Yeah.
But like
that's better.
Social media is bringing much benefit to like the sports visibility.
Mm-hmm.
Like with Pantheon, Chase Hiller gets like 100,000 views, millions of views, and like at the end of the day, just like my sales really don't change when people see these viral reels. People just like are like, wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
See ya.
Yeah, and like it's hard to know, right? Like, oh, 1 million views, but like what does that actually do? Like,
yeah, like if I get 5,000 views on a reel, which is 5,000, 10,000 views on a reel is pretty normal for me. I don't think I'm going to convince that many people to skate. But if I could make a YouTube video where I usually get like 3,000 to 10,000 views, I feel like if 1% of those people get into it, it's like, I don't know, I'm getting 100 people into skating, hopefully. Like, I think the high quality stuff has more potential, like long treks, to get people into the sport than social media.
100%.
Maybe social media is just something to keep the stoke going, sort of thing.
Let them know you're alive. Let them know you have a new YouTube video, and then send them to YouTube. Like it's just free advertising, right? So like, just use it as that. Like I don't like Instagram as being the center of content just because of how limited it is, right? Like you can do really long videos now, but the quality of the YouTube interface of like having chapters, things like that, like the YouTube interface is just way better than being on Instagram for me personally. When I'm trying to actually learn something, I'm trying to actually absorb information. So keep up the YouTube, man. That stuff's really cool. I know a lot of people are enjoying it.
Yeah, check out the Blue Ridge Longboard project on YouTube.
Yeah, do it up.
I got some videos.
It's got some videos. Got more coming too. And your next thing is skate camp. So if people want to see you next.
Yeah, I think skate camp. I want to go to Broadway Bomb, but like financially, vacation wise, and just like all that stuff, I don't know if I'll be able to make it.
That's valid. Yeah, it's a lot.
Someday in my life, I'd like to win Broadway Bomb, but maybe this isn't the year.
Winning Broadway Bomb is quite the goal, right? You're risking life and limb. So
yeah, it's like I don't know. I would love to. I don't know if I have it in me in a talent or safety thing. Both. Like people who do it are really talented too.
Hey, you weren't far last time. You were right behind Titus. Titus was a little far behind Daniel though, right?
Titus and I were just caught watching each other, and Daniel, we had no idea he was there, and he just like killed it.
He just put you in the dust.
Because like even like on a one-on-one level, Daniel could beat anyone.
Yeah.
So like not knowing he was there, and then him and then us racing each other and just watching each other because we didn't realize Daniel was in front. It was like there was no chance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Daniel's a beast.
It was over before it began.
I saw him at Ultra even like going pretty hard. So
yeah,
it'd be fun to see what comes of what he does next. Kind of,
Speed demon.
Yeah. More of these sprint races. We'll see some cool stuff. Yeah. Hey man, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate you taking all this time out of your morning.
Awesome.
I know you're getting married soon. You got a lot going on in your life. So
yeah,
this has been awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Max.